Hello, welcome to 8.9 News. I'm Costain. A new report from the Food Ethics Council says that a whole sector approach is necessary to transition dairy towards a resilient, fair and fit for purpose future. Abi Williams is the dairy project lead at the Food Ethics Council. I asked her what she means by a whole sector approach and how this could help to deliver resilience in UK dairy.
So I guess firstly I'll talk about what we mean by resilience. So I think it's important to say when we're talking about the need to create resilience in UK dairy, we're not talking about a way to find ways of finding to keep things the way they are. We don't want to keep things the way they are, essentially. We know that many on-farm practices and dairy systems need to change to work better for people, animals and nature. But resilience is actually also about creating an attractive sector for future generations. So really, we should be asking what's important to young people, both for young people that want to work in the farming sector, but also for young people that want to consume dairy in the future. So for everyone, really. We know that lots of young people are interested in agroecology, they're interested in socially just systems and have values that align with protecting ecosystems. And actually, dairy is really well placed to embrace this young energy. We know that despite what some media outlets may suggest, there is actually an appetite for positive change amongst many farmers. And some farmers are actually already making some incredible shifts in their farming businesses despite difficult circumstances. But we need to recognise that there are lots of farmers that are locked into systems that they feel are out of their control. And farmers can't do this all on their own. They need support from across the sector if we want to accelerate a transition.
Which brings us to the whole sector. So what do we mean by whole sector?
So I suppose when we talk about a whole sector, it's recognising the complex financial and social systems that farmers are operating within. So looking at a whole sector approach, it helps us to identify where power lies. We feel that we all have a role to play, but particularly processors and retailers hold a lot of power when it comes to making change in the dairy sector. And we think without this sort of larger sort of whole sector approach and more systemic change, we risk actually just tinkering around the edges a little bit.
One of the key actions that the report calls for is the end of the sale of milk as a loss leader. What difference would that make, and what do retailers make of this suggestion?
So the price of milk is always a contentious issue, particularly at the moment when sort of households and supermarkets are trying to keep the shopping basket price down. But I mean, loss leaders in general distort the reality of what things cost, and milk has been particularly and unfairly squeezed over the years. So as well as distorting the true cost of producing milk, artificially low pricing has arguably contributed to further sort of disconnect between the public and food and farming production. There's clearly a lot of work to be done in reconnecting the public with food, and loss leaders don't go anyway to mending this. If retailers can commit to ending the sale of milk as a loss leader, not only would it hopefully give a little bit more wiggle room financially to pay people more fairly across the whole dairy value chain, but it's also a first step in highlighting the true cost of milk to the public. In terms of their thoughts on this, we are holding a dairy summit, sort of a future dairy summit next week. So we'll find out in a little bit more detail, hopefully from retailers, what they think. But anecdotally, we know a couple of them are very interested in this idea, but they're, I suppose, they're understandably reluctant to talk publicly about it, sort of due to competition reasons, but there's hope there.
Retailers often say in these circumstances that they'd like to make the change, but that they don't want to be at a competitive disadvantage. Is there a need for the government to step in here?
Yeah, I mean, so we've kind of seen this a little bit in terms of milk contracts with processors and dairy farmers. So there's a voluntary code of conduct at the moment to try and regulate those relationships between farmers and processors. It doesn't talk about milk prices, but it talks about the relationships they have. And there are a number of processors that have signed up for that. However, we've heard from them that it's often been at sort of a disadvantage to them, and really they want this sort of policy to come in from government, and the exact same thing would be relevant for government coming in and kind of regulating this space. And we've not done loads of work on loss leaders and the role that government can play in that, but there's definitely sort of parallels there with the dairy code of conduct and processors, and also retailers' role as well.
The other action that I'm particularly interested in is the call to create secure, fair and flexible contracts. Why is this important?
Yeah, when we spoke with farmers for the past few years, one of the things that came up a lot in terms of their inability to make changes, or the things that they were struggling with to make changes on the farm, was these really sort of restrictive and unfair contracts that they had with processors. And despite all the aspiration in the world, some farmers just felt that they couldn't even begin to start that journey of a transition to something better, whatever that meant to them. I mean, there's loads that comes in as well around bad practice from processors in terms of not giving farmers very much time to read or sign contracts. But beyond sort of the inflexibility of them, there's also just this big power imbalance. So there's not many milk contracts going around. So if you're lucky enough to be able to get a milk contract as a farmer, there is a power imbalance there where retailers or processors, whoever you're signing with, often kind of call the shots, and they often feel that they kind of just have to go along with it. And often built in is things like exclusivity. And so we heard farmers that wanted to sell locally just small amounts of milk, particularly during the pandemic when there was kind of resurgence of local food, and they weren't able to do that, and often were actually having to throw milk away down the drain rather than be able to sell locally, which seems ridiculous. So there's things there around flexibility, just being pragmatic, but also retailers and processors being open to farmers coming in, having conversations around being able to change contracts as well. It seems that there's actually just a lot of miscommunication between processors and farmers, and that's due to years of sort of bad practice, mistrust, poor relationships. And I think, as I mentioned earlier, something like a dairy code of conduct will go a massive way to improving these, particularly around flexibility and exclusivity.
Now, the dairy industry has industrialised quite recently and extremely rapidly. What are the main ethical challenges that you would associate with this industrialisation?
So yeah, in a nutshell, there's been a bit of a race to the bottom in dairy. So as you implied, this comes with a whole raft of ethical tensions and challenges. And we find ourselves actually in a situation where many farmers don't see any other option other than to increase their herd size and efficiency if they want to continue being a profitable business. And this has been a trend for some years now. And although you could argue that there's lots of great stuff that has come out of having more efficient dairy systems, there are also some ethical challenges with that, and particularly around animal welfare. And how much should we be pushing these animals? Is it fair to be for them to be producing as much milk as they are in some instances? Is it right that we have fully housed systems? I don't have an answer. There's not a straightforward answer. But these are the tensions and challenges that have come along with these sort of more industrialized system, with essentially dairy farmers being pushed onto this treadmill of volume-based production over anything else. Another, if I have time, another sort of key ethical issue that we've found that is often kind of overlooked in these dairy systems is the people element. So farmers and farm workers and the impact of these systems on them is often forgotten about. But actually, we're operating dairy systems now where dairy farmers are incredibly overworked, they're stressed, they're underpaid, they don't have time to get off the farm and engage in peer-to-peer learning or knowledge exchange, many of which are available. And then, yeah, we're expecting them to make all these changes on the farm, whereas there's not even enough hours in the day for them to be able to milk enough cows to be able to even just run a profitable business. So I think that people element and the impact it has on farmers themselves is really important as well.
That was Abi Williams from the Food Ethics Council. More news on our website, 8.9.com. That's all for now. We're back soon. Thanks for watching.